thank you very much. I really am very proud to be sharing the stage with this esteemed the panel. And thank you for the commercial service actually having me here. So Autogrid actually is a startup that started out of ARPA-E grant out of US Department of Energy.
Can you bring the mic closer to you? Yeah.
Sorry.
Lift the mic up, yeah.
We were the first ARPA-E grant funded company, and we're still in business, so that's great. This was about 10 years ago. We focused at the time with a vision to actually transform the electric system and the companies which are in this space to accelerate their adoption for distributed energy resources. Back then, demand response, which is still the largest DER, was the name of the game. And today we have ventured into electric vehicles, battery storage, front of the meter, behind the meter, all things that Mr. Neil Chatterjee has described. We were one of the direct beneficiaries of actually playing in this market and aggregating these sorts of assets. So today we have about 5,000 megawatts that we manage under contract. This is world over. And we've attracted investment from very interesting players, from Shell, which is in the oil and gas sector, to regulated utilities and controls vendors. There is a telling sign here that we have all these players coming into the market, which are incumbents, which have traditionally provided one service or the other, but they're coming into place to actually eat the utilities lunch, essentially. As part of retail providers, they could be providers who are just service providers playing in the wholesale markets or organized markets, or else somebody who's directly engaging with that end customer and providing them the service. Now it begs the question, so if all of these players are coming into the picture, what is the utility going to do, and what is their model going to be to ensure that they still are relevant and do not become irrelevant? So let's peel back and start looking at some of the disruptive trends that we've observed. First and foremost is the introduction of smart meters. What this allows us to do is introduce new tariffs, and we've talked about that earlier on, that tariffs are a way to actually increase customer engagement and drive value. So in India, I think the ISGF folks have published that there's the vision to install about 250 million smart meters. And this is important because this is going to generate enormous amount of data. And utilities, for one, are not in a place to innovate to uncover the value out of this data. So they need private players like us and other companies to actually help them understand the customers and their behavioral patterns. The second is the introduction of renewable energy. This is, and in India, the number is about 175 gigawatts by 2024. This is going to create enormous amount of fluctuation intermittency in the grid. And what this is going to drive is basically cost fluctuations. So cost of electricity is not flat throughout the day, and that only gets worse. So now we have to ask the question, how are customers going to be playing and understanding all of these changes, and what does it mean to them? There are some other emerging trends that we also look at. That is, India is a mobile-first economy. Smartphones volume is going to double by 2024. Broadband penetration is increasing significantly, and the cost of broadband is decreasing significantly in India. And both of these combined, actually, this is an interesting trend, is digital assistants. How many of you have smartphones in your hand right now, right? Siri, Google, or Apple. These are digital assistants that will live in your palm. So essentially what this means is the enormous amount of data that we are going to create has to be presented to the customers in these formats. This becomes a new engagement strategy for utilities to use the data and provide them on a smartphone. There is an interesting statistic in the US that utilities have put smart meters in provider portals, and the statistic is that about between 8 to 17 minutes is what a typical user uses these portals for in a year. Not a month, in a year. So that's basically every single time they go and pay a bill. Now India has a different challenge because you have Amazon Pay, you have Paytm, so people don't even go into these portals, right? That's basically, you never go into a utility portal to pay your bill. So what's the value that you're creating by putting all of this infrastructure to the end consumer? How are they going to get informed? How are they going to take benefit out of this? And oh, by the way, you're going to rate base all of these devices, which means their rates are going to go up. Unless we see a big transformation wherein which we've seen in the telecom sector, where the rates have gone down. Back in the day, there were 10 rupees per minute phone calls. Now you don't even care about a cost per minute. Until you see that kind of transformation happen, it is very hard to justify this cost investment to the average Indian consumer who is already very cost sensitive. So I'm going to bust through really quickly here. I think what's key takeaway from here is that if you look at on the far left side, I think this is a bit of an eye chart, is personalization. All the data, as Dina talked about, basically extracting the value so that you could personalize and target your customers so that they can understand, they can be educated about their consumption patterns so that they can make changes to how they're consuming on a daily basis. For example, if the rates are going up and your consumption actually has increased over the last month, your utility should be in a business to give you an alert or a notification on your phone or a digital assistant that, hey consumer, your consumption is going to go up, and at this rate, your bill is going to be 30% more than what it was last month. Until that information, that engagement is there, the utilities basically are basics upholds and wires company at the end of the day. So in my opinion, ultimately what this distills to is the model where the utilities have to survive in is customer engagement. They have to put the customer in the front seat, drive efficiency through the entire supply chain, and make sure that the customers are benefited. And also, where FERC and CERC and these regulatory agencies come into play is to make sure there's fairness across that entire supply chain. So the independent power producer are compensated fairly. That's a big issue in India where there's about 6 to 8 month delay for IPPs to get paid from state governments. So this is a very complex regulatory structure to operate in if you are a private entity and want to do business. So I think that is pretty much the end of, and finally what I would say is that with the emergence of distributed energy resources, those consumers who are traditionally are used to just taking one-way electrons now start feeding back into the grid. So utilities have to be in the business of actually extracting value and compensating these customers who are feeding back to the grid. This is commonly known as a prosumer as opposed to a consumer of energy. And this transformation may happen slowly in India, not as fast as it's happening in the US and other markets, but it will happen. And like I said, change is constant. So it's happening and we have to be prepared for it. So I'll skip to this, and I think thank you so much for the time again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vish. We'll